first poem I want to look at is The Garden. And I'll preface it with just a few comments, and then I'll read it, and then I'll make some brief comments on it. Most people assume that it's probably one of Lord Fairfax's own gardens, but I don't think there's any reason for making that conclusion per necessity. The garden always has biblical weight insofar as Adam and Eve are in the garden. And as I said already, in many of the gospel accounts, the stories that Jesus will tell, parables and otherwise, are about a gardener. And so it has, I think, the biblical connotations, but it also has the Edenic connotations there of perfection. And the other thing is that it does pick up Neo-Platonism. And let me read from Isabel Revers, her extract on Neo-Platonism. I think it's chapter 3, am I right here? Yep, Platonism and Neo-Platonism. Skip forward, because Neo-Platonism becomes enormously influential in Cambridge in the 17th century. The Cambridge Neoplatonists exert extraordinary weight, and Herbert and Marvell and Milton, but the latter two, but particularly Marvell, is there while the Neoplatonists are influential, and he would be very well acquainted with Neoplatonic writing. And I'll just read from page 36 here. The most influential aspect of Ficino, who's an Italian Florentine Neoplatonist, was his theory of Platonic love. His De Amore on Love, a commentary on Plato's Symposium, together with Pico's commentary on Benevieni's Canzoni on Divine Love, provoked a series of imitative love treatises in the 16th century Italy. And in terms of how these get expressed in English Renaissance poetry, well, Spencer is claimed to be a Platonist, but he emphasizes marriage and procreation in a way that is non-Platonic. Platonic never has love that is fulfilled in terms of marriage and procreation. It's an intellectual process and not an actual lived love experience in terms of marriage and family. So I'm not so sure about that. But the chief Platonist among the poets, says Isabel Rivers, is Milton in his early poetry. But he wants to Christianize it, but we will find it in Marvell in his religious poems, she says. In the love poetry, that's the largest number of allusions to Neoplatonism is to be found, but these are often negative and ironic. So, for example, I'll come back to this after the break rather than read any more of this, but in Neoplatonism, God is often presented in terms of a fountain from which being arises and spills over. So it's a source or a fount of being, and it's often presented as a tree in which a bird, the soul is placed on a tree. These are typical images of Neoplatonism, the idea of being or love overflowing like a fountain, and everything's pervaded with God's being and God's love. So you can see how it corresponds with Christian thinking, but it's rooted in sort of non-biblical motifs and ideas. So the garden, I think, does fit more like that. And you can see here he's going to talk about associations with types of leaves. So the palm, the oak, and the bays, these are often used in prizes and contests. The laurel leaf, the palm, the bays, you put it on a crown of victory for poetic competitions or athletic competitions. But anyway, I'll just read the poem and then I'll comment here. But I do want you to ask yourself while we read it whether the garden here reflects the garden referred to in Paradise. The garden. How vainly men themselves amaze to win the palm, the oak, or bays, and their incessant labors see, crowned from some single herb or tree, whose short and narrow verge shade does prudently their toils upbraid, while all flowers and all trees do close to weave the garlands of repose. Fair quiet have I found thee here, and innocence thy sister dear. Mistaken long I sought you then in busy companies of men. Your sacred plants, if here below, only among the plants will grow. Society is all but rude to this delicious solitude. No white or red was ever seen, so amorous as this lovely green. Fond lovers, cruel as their flame, cut in these trees their mistress' name. Little, alas, they know or heed how far these beauties hers exceed. Fair trees, where sere your barks I wound, no name shall but your own be found. When we have run our passion's heat, love hither makes his best retreat. The gods that mortal beauty chase, still in a tree did end their race. Now he's alluding here to Ovid's Metamorphoses here. Apollo hunted Daphne so, only that she might laurel grow. And Pan did after Syrinx speed, not as a nymph, but for a reed. What wondrous life in this I lead. Ripe apples drop about my head, the luscious clusters of the vine upon my mouth do crush their wine. The nectarine and curious peach into my hands themselves do reach. Stumbling on melons as I pass, ensnared with flowers I fall on grass. Meanwhile the mind from pleasure less withdraws into its happiness. The mind, that ocean where each kind does straight its own resemblance find, yet it creates, transcending these, far other worlds and other seas. Annihilating all that's made to a green thought in a green shade. Famous line. Here at the fountain's sliding foot, or at some fruit tree's mossy root, casting the body's vest aside, my soul into the boughs does glide, where like a bird it sits and sings, then wets and combs its silver wings, and till prepared for longer flight, waves its plumes the various light. Such was that happy garden state where man there walked without a mate. Walked without a mate. Note the solitude. After a place so pure and sweet, what other help could yet be meet? But 'twas beyond a mortal's share to wander solitary there. Two paradises 'twere in one, to live in paradise alone. How well the skillful gardener drew of flowers and herbs this dial knew, where from above the milder sun does through a fragrant zodiac run, and as it works the industrious bee computes its time as well as we. How could such sweet and wholesome hours be reckoned but with herbs and flowers? So you can see he obviously explicitly makes reference to paradise, but this paradise is a very solitary one, and he is on his own and he's contemplating the good, and the good is in the green of the garden. It's the greenness of the garden. The green has a sort of an ideational content of goodness, in a way that Plato, when he talks about the ideal form of things, that he's contemplating the greenness of the garden, and the green has metaphysical associations here. And as I say, it's highly Platonic, and he divests himself of his body. His body's seen like a vest, and he takes it off, and his soul flies out of it and lands in the tree, a disembodied self, an intellectual self, contemplating the good in the same way that Plato regards good in almost disembodied terms. And the idea of the soul for Plato is regards the body as a prison house for the soul. We're going to see that this when we look at Marvell's dialogue between body and soul, that he plays on this idea of the soul as contrary to the body and vice versa. You know, they live together, but they actually blame the other for the ills of life. So he will dramatize it there. But here he presents it as the self that he is as a disembodied self. So this is a very, I would say, non-Christian way of looking at yourself. It is Platonic. Remember, in Plato's view, and then the Greeks' view, when men die, they go down to the underworld, and they live a shadowy existence for 1,000 years, and then their identities are wiped out. They get dragged through the river Lethe, and they make them forget themselves, and then they are reincarnated. Plato believes in reincarnation. Your soul is reincarnated into another body. So the soul is the disembodied part of yourself. That is the rational part of yourself. So that the ancient Greeks were dualists in this sense. They thought the mind was good and the body was a prison house for the soul. That's almost how Marvell is presenting it here. Except he's now fusing with biblical thought by putting it in the Garden of Eden. And is he really reflecting on it biblically, or is he reflecting on it in more of a idealized form? But note that here, even the paradise is one that it pre-exists Eve, which is semi-humorous. I don't know if he wants it to be, he's not blaming Eve for all the ills, but he's saying it was a paradise before Eve came along, and in fact he calls it two paradises to be alone. That's not how Eve, or rather Adam, perceived it in the biblical account. When Eve is created, he says, at last, it's bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh, and it becomes a better place than it was, not a worse place. Marvell knows that. And he's toying with this here. But note also that the garden, as he portrays it, is one that loves him, and it's the active thing, and he's passive. The apples drop about his head, the clusters of the vine press themselves. He doesn't have to bite them because they're squeezing their juice into his teeth, and it's going down the wine's going into his mouth without him doing anything, and all of these thrust themselves into his hands. And the melons, it's like he's being overcome by nature. He's the passive, and it's active. So it's an inversion of what you would normally think of being in the garden. Being in the garden is to harvest the garden. And here he's being harvested. So you can't take this too seriously on the level of this is how he views it, but it's a thought experiment, as it were. But an extended reflection on the garden and on greenness and on gardens and on the original garden and on the delight of contemplation and the delight of solitude, something Milton also talks about a great deal. Now the white and the red here, I don't know if he has this in mind, but between Yorkshire and Lancashire, the so-called War of the Roses, there was the white rose and the red rose. Or they could just be colors that we associate with the courtly love tradition, I don't know, but it might have more local political connotations here. But neither of them are so amorous as this lovely green. So greenness has a metaphysical connotation here in Marvell's work that it doesn't almost anywhere else. Comment or question? And these allusions here to trees and representative trees, these are directly taken from Ovid's Metamorphoses. So love, as in Cupid, chases a nymph, and Apollo hunts Daphne in the same way, and Daphne, the nymph, to evade him, turns herself into a laurel leaf, and Apollo then takes the laurel leaf and puts it in his hair. So he's trying to pursue the nymph, and the nymph metamorphosizes into a laurel leaf, and thereafter, because of his love for the nymph, he wears the laurel leaf in his hair. Likewise, Pan chases after the nymph Syrinx, and she to evade his grasp transforms into a flute, and he then plucks the flute and plays the panpipes. But now he does it not to get the nymph, but rather to get the musical instrument. So there's he's playing with the mythology and inverting the desired good, not sexual consummation, but ideal consummation, the music and the nature. The nature itself is the good. And then he inverts it, and nature becomes rather than the passive object that we exploit, we are the passive thing that it acts upon. So lots of inversions here. And note that this is a sort of a key passage here, I think. The mind, that ocean where each kind is straight its own resemblance find, microcosm, macrocosm. Yet it creates, transcending these, far other worlds and other seas. He will use the same phrase into his coy mistress. That is, other worlds and other seas, both of which are reflections on the end of the book of Revelation, where God creates a new heavens and a new earth. Right? Takes the current world, which he created. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And when it comes to the apocalypse, he doesn't destroy everything. He renews it. He restores it. But he does it, annihilating all that's made to a green thought in a green shade. Now, what is a green thought in a green shade? Exactly. It's the relation of the old Narnia to the new Narnia. The green thought and the green shade is the perfection of everything that we love in this life. In contemplation, it's the ideal good. It's the ascending the ladder, the Neo-Platonic ladder, to its topmost point, and the topmost point is love incarnate. Just like Augustine portrays it in his Ordo Amoris. But again, the idea of disincarnating yourself in a soulish form without a body, he plays with that idea here. So rather than, and in this contemplation in my notes, we have a revival of the hortus conclusus, the enclosed garden. Hortus conclusus. Hortus is a garden, and enclosed conclusus. And the guilt in this garden is that we should farm. So here's the dilemma between Cain and Abel. It's between that, and often the two, Cain and Abel, were seen as two forms of living, the active life versus the contemplative life. Abel lives the contemplative life of the shepherd, whereas Abel is tilling the soil. An active life, God condemns the active life. He upholds the contemplative life. This is one way of reading the account of Cain and Abel that was very popular in the medieval ages. I think it's a little fanciful, to put it mildly. I don't think the active life is condemned. But note that there is the avoidance of sex in this, and all the other ideas. Now, the color, by the way, is the green is the color that the priest normally wears in the Anglican Church. The vestments are normally green. That's the standard for 2/3 of the church calendar. And then during certain seasons, they will put on scarlet or white, the alb, the robe over top, just to signify we're in a different phase of the church calendar. So just remember that as well. Marvell, in an Anglican context, the green robe this is the ordinary vestment of the priest. So it's green rather than scarlet or white. Go back to what we said there earlier. So rather than white or red, it might not have the political connotations of what? Lent and Easter, but it be the ordinary year that's being consecrated. That's the amorous thing. And so it's pulling us to the ordinary aspects of life and not just the atonement. And the thought of ordinary service in that sense. So it's a self-directed love rather than consummated in the opposite sex. So a self-love, but united with the love of God. Anyway, any thoughts about this? It's a complicated poem. It inverts a lot of expectations. I think if you wrote on this, you would find there's a lot of Neo-Platonism in his conception here, but confusing things and idealizing nature and the greenness in a way that is rather novel, but I think heralds the emphasis on nature in an idealized form that we see comes full-blown in the Romantics, 150 years before them. I have no recollection of Wordsworth citing Marvell as an influence in his poetry. No, I have no recollection of that. I've done a fair bit of work on Wordsworth. I don't think that Marvell is a significant influence. I'm sure he read him, but I don't recall it. No, any comments? If not, I'll leave it. Okay, let me leave it off for that.